Our first writer is a mother. And she says, in yesterday's Facebook Live, and for the rest of us who don't know what yesterday was, because you could be watching this anytime, if you look over on the left side, you'll see an item that says units. That would be unit or Facebook Live number 11. So in Facebook recording 11, you were talking about anger being a kind of victim trap, that the more we express anger indiscriminately, or often I use the word unfocused anger, just vomiting it, the more anger we feel. And that's been proven by studies. So Mom's question is that true for sadness also? The more we vent our sadness indiscriminately, do we get more sad, like with anger? Yes. Just venting unhappy feelings doesn't work. It doesn't make them go away. In fact, it makes us focus on them more and builds them. Now, some sadness is unavoidable. No denying that. I'm not saying don't be sad. It's about how we are sad, what we do with it. Some of it's just unavoidable. A loved one dies, you're sad. Well, yeah, duh. You cared about them. They die. We miss them. We feel robbed. We are sad. Of course. But if we just keep repeating it over and over, and we've all seen that, people who just live in their sadness. Novels are written about these people who live in falling down houses and just sit and continue to mourn a spouse, a child, a marriage that didn't happen. They can grieve for an entire lifetime and give up their lifetime because of that loss. Why would they do that? There's a lot of complicated reasons. It's a form of victimhood. It gives them a kind of a sense of identity. I am a victim of loss, whereas before, if you asked them who they were, they didn't really know. I know people who walk around and say, I am a victim of blank abuse, as though that identified them. And if we prolong our sadness or anger or any of these negative feelings, it frees us from all other responsibilities. While you're expressing sadness, while you're grieving, nobody will challenge you to do anything. They well, don't bother her because she's grieving, and that's not the most common response, but I've seen a great number of people grieve for their entire lives and avoid any sense of responsibility afterward. If instead of repeating the sadness, just like I recommended with anger, we talk about it with somebody who cares about us. We don't just indiscriminately express it. We talk about it. We can then feel healing from people who care about us. That's where the healing happens. We're in pain. We talk about it. We get loved by people while we're in pain. The wounds begin to heal. Here's another person who says in yesterday's Facebook Live, again, number 11, you were talking about telling children the truth about not being loved by either parent. So if I were a parent, I would tell my child, the reason that you're so angry and unhappy all the time is because I didn't know how to unconditionally love you, and neither did your mom or dad, whichever you are. So the question of this person is, could you use that Facebook Live recording, the last one, number 11, to show to a child that you're trying to explain this to? Because I would find it difficult explaining this to a child. Yes, of course you can. Everybody in the world watches YouTubes and Facebook and other videos to understand something. You want to learn how to operate a chainsaw? Easy. YouTube will tell you 1,000 different ways to do it. Many of them wrong, but most of them right. You can find how to do anything on video. So kids are used to hearing explanations on video. They watch them all day, and anything is better than their being constantly confused and frustrated. Or you could write out notes from the recording for yourself and refer to your notes as you're talking. Way better to refer to your notes than to be stumped about what to say and leave the child confused and afraid. Or you could take the parenting training, where chapter 6, the entire chapter 6 in the Ridiculously Effective Parenting Training, is dedicated to how to first tell the truth about yourself and about your child and about their pain. The whole chapter is about that, is what we covered just really briefly last time. Telling the truth about your role in not loving your children is a critical step in healing for your child and for you. Without your telling that truth, they can only conclude that their misery is because, one, they are defective, in which case they become anxious, depressed, addicted to any number of substances or behaviors, or two, they conclude that other people are defective, in which case then they feel like victims and they're angry and they feel entitled. So we have to get rid of that confusion. We have to explain to them why they have these feelings that are plaguing, even torturing them. When I was, seems like 100 years ago, but there was a time when I was doing a rotation, I think in residency or internship or medical school, who remembers. But I met a man who in the Veterans Hospital. He was a master sergeant in the Air Force, which is a pretty high non-commissioned rank. There are 9 ranks, enlisted ranks, E1 when you just start off in basic training, to E9, and he was an E7. You have to work at it to become an E7. They don't just automatically promote you through the ranks. He had full retirement, good benefits, medical coverage. He was enjoying his life. What was unusual was that only after he retired was it discovered that he had Down syndrome, where one of the 13 chromosomes, that's those collections of genes, they often look like little X's, but chromosomes have lots of DNA in them. One of the 13 chromosomes has 3 copies instead of 2. Most everybody else has 13 pairs or 26 chromosomes, and people with trisomy, with Down syndrome, one of them is extra, so they have an extra chromosome. And this is almost always associated with mild to moderate effects on their ability to think. In other words, they're to some degree intellectually impaired. When I was a kid, we used to say they're mild to moderately retarded, and that was the word everybody used then. Everybody, caregivers, healthcare professionals, the parents of the kids, everybody. And we used it without any deprecating tone, unless, of course, you were referring to your brother, and then, of course, it was insulting. And retarded was a perfectly good word. When you slow the revolutions of an engine, you retard the revolutions of an engine. You just slow it down. In other words, people who were retarded were slower. But then that became taboo, and then it went to handicapped, to disabled, to differently abled, no kidding, to intellectually challenged, to cognitive impairment, to now they say special needs about everything. So I'm not going to try to keep up. He had a form of Down syndrome called mosaic translocation Down syndrome, where some but not all of his cells had an extra copy of this 21st chromosome, 21st of the 23. And and some of the cells were not affected. But he was definitely slow, cognitively impaired, retarded. You pick your word, and I won't pick it for you. So I asked him, because it was pretty obvious that he thought slow. I said, how did you succeed in becoming a master sergeant with Down syndrome? And he said, I just kept going. And that is how we make it as parents. Things happen. Things always will. They come up where we think we're failing and we've learned nothing, and things get too difficult, and things just aren't going like we'd planned. Keep going. Your kids misbehave after they've behaved well for a whole 3 hours or maybe 3 weeks. You fall on your own face. You react with anger. Keep going. The parents who become effective and have fun are those who are persistent, not brilliant. Love wins in the end. I was once in a deep cave. Deep, dark, really deep cave. Down there where if you wore night goggles, you wouldn't see anything because there's no light to amplify. And I was crawling through a tube, a long tube, probably almost 100 yards long. The tube was really small. You had to crawl through it on your belly and put your hands out in front of you because the dimensions of the tube were from my shoulder to my shoulder and from my back to my belly. That was it. So you stuck your hands out ahead of you and you moved with your fingers and toes. I can't even, if I think of that now, right before I go to bed, I have a hard time going to sleep. It was really creepy. But I had an expert take me through the cave first before I took a group of Boy Scouts through the cave, and I just followed the expert. I just kept reminding myself, he's been through this cave many times, and he's alive. So I only had to decide one thing, follow him. And then I was fine. So I took the Boy Scouts through, and I sent a few of the smaller kids through ahead of me, and then I went, and so there was a bunch of kids behind me. There was a huge group of us. There were 25 or 30 of us. And the kid ahead of me, who has some claustrophobia like mine, just stopped, put his face in the dirt, and started crying and said, "I can't go on." And I'm thinking, oh, you're going to go on because I'm not staying in this place. I was doing okay, barely, just by moving forward, constantly fingers and toes, following the light of the guy ahead of me and knowing that it was going to be 100 yards long. And here's this kid ahead of me. And I said, you have a choice. You can keep moving, or I'm going to begin to eat you while you're alive, starting with your feet and moving right up through the middle of you, and I will pass you. So you choose which way you want to do this. He moved. He kept moving. He still could have just chosen to sit there and cry, and there's some people that do. They panic and they sit still, and those are the people who fail. Those are the people who fail as parents. Those are the people who fail in life. Never give up. In the Bible, there's a phrase that talks about enduring to the end. And it had a different meaning in the 1600s when King James appointed a bunch of scholars to put it together. It's not like he had a hand in it, but he got the experts together. And then what it meant was to be diligent and keep going. How do I know? Because I found a dictionary from that period of time, and that's what it says. Now, it almost always implies some measure of suffering, but it doesn't have to. So even the Bible says, keep going, whether you believe in the Bible or not, I don't care. I'm just saying this principle has existed from the beginning of time. We don't have to be brilliant. We just have to keep moving. The only way to fail is to quit. This is from a mother. New subject. She said, my husband is very immature and selfish about, well, everything. He parks in no parking in handicap spots. He doesn't stop at stop signs. This is whether he's by himself or with me or with the kids. He buys things from friends, for an agreed price. He takes something from a friend's home and then never pays them, and they bug him, on and on. And the kids know that he does all this. He lies constantly, lies about what he's done, what he hasn't done. We never know what the truth is. And if he's caught in a lie, he never, ever admits that he's lied. And in all of my many years of living with him, I have never heard him say that he was wrong. He calls other people derogatory names all the time, fat, stupid, calls them ethnic slurs, whatever. And all of this while the kids are around. I'll make this easy for you. It doesn't really matter whether you apply a name to it, but it kind of helps to understand it a little bit. The reason I say it doesn't matter is because it's not going to make it like go away. He's just a narcissist. Has full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. And if you look that up on Google, you'll find that you have to have 5 of 9 primary characteristics in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is for mental health disorders. If you have 5 of these 9 characteristics, then you have narcissistic personality disorder. But it's been my personal experience in working with a lot of people who have true narcissism that you really only have to ask one question. And I ask spouses this when they say, my husband's really a selfish person. I say, stop. Have you ever heard your husband say these words? Oh, I was wrong. Or my bad. Or my fault. Have you ever heard him say those words? And the answer is commonly, this is not a rare disorder. No, he's never, ever said those words. Narcissist. Pretty much a guarantee with one question. She continues. We live in California, and the state has ordered a quarantine with all non-essential businesses to close, and for people not to go places unless they really have to. But he opens his little small shop, which is definitely not essential, every day, and invites his friends to come over, and they drink and they barbecue together. And then he brings all of that home, even though the kids and I have expressed our fears about how he's exposing us to the virus. Yeah, as in he's threatening your lives. No exaggeration at all. The stories now abound of where one person who knew that they needed to stay home just went out and did whatever they wanted to and came back and gave it to, their entire family. Was a story I read 2 days ago. Yesterday, Donna read me a story about how an entire church choir got it because they got together after they knew better than to get together. It spreads like crazy under the right circumstances. You need to understand this about a narcissist. He is the only person in his tiny world. In his little sphere, only one person is alive, him. They don't change. You'll think you can explain something to him, but you can't, because he already has his little world defined, and he's the only one in it. Other people exist only as temporary conveniences to use, to lie to get things from, to have sex with, or inconveniences. Bother them, get in their way, whatever. People aren't people. People are simply things that either help a narcissist or don't. Mom continues. My children love their father, and every day they pray to God to protect their father and keep him away from the temptation of cigarettes, alcohol, and bad friends. My guess is that if they pray that every day, you had something to do with that prayer. You need to understand some things. Well, you don't need to, but since you're asking the question, and the implication is that you would like to be happier, that's why I say you need to, because I'm never going to tell you what to do, and I couldn't follow up and make you do it if I wanted to, which I don't. They don't love him. You just said the children love their father. They don't. They're kids, and he's a completely selfish human being. So they genuinely, unconditionally care about his happiness. Not possible for a young child still living at home. Children need their parents too much to ever have the love be unconditional, the child for the parent, ever, because they need something. It automatically implies expectations and an exchange. So children don't, young children don't. Maybe when you're 30 or 40 you can, but they don't unconditionally love him. They need him. And they desperately want his love. And when he pays attention to them, they love the attention, but they don't love him. And that's true with any children who are living at home. You continue. My children always come to me and tell me the things that their father did wrong, which is every day, mostly all day. But they don't allow me to talk to him about what he did. Well, what does that tell you? You say that your children love him, but they're afraid of him because they don't want you to talk to him about what he did. They're afraid of what he'll do. So they don't love him, they're afraid of him. You add, my husband and I are separated, but we still live in the same house. That's not unusual for narcissists, by the way, because they live in their own little world. They marry somebody solely for the purpose of that person becoming their servant and going out and bringing back in a truck all the things that they can pour into their world. But their spouse doesn't really exist to them except as a convenience and a source of what they want. And so it's not uncommon for them, well, divorce is the most common thing that happens, but for them to live in the same house, benefit from all of the advantages of having a spouse, food being provided, the house being cleaned, having sex periodically, all the advantages of marriage, but they don't have to interact with their spouse, except for when they want to, which is how narcissists behave anyway. So my first question is, why in the world do you still live in the same house? That's a real question. It's not like get out. I'm not saying get out. I'm just going, what prompts you to stay there? Your husband is making you feel small and meaningless. That comes through in every word that you've said so far. And he's setting an example that will destroy your children. Just kill them. The people, I see people from every imaginable walk of life. I've occasionally had delusions of grandeur and thought that I could help some people, but I've discovered that there are a couple of groups of people that are the hardest to treat on earth, harder than schizophrenics. Narcissists are number one. They never change. And the second hardest group of people to help find unconditional love and happiness are the spouses and children of narcissists. Why? Because for a narcissist, there's only one word. They live in just one little world with just them in it, so there's only one word for a narcissist, me. And they make everybody else feel small, and he makes you feel small, and he makes the children feel small. They don't even dare tell you stuff that you might then tell him. And now he's ignoring the government's quarantine because the government isn't part of his tiny little world and could be exposing you all to potential death. So why would you stand by while he does all that? It seems like it would be harming, well, it is harming you and could end up killing you. You might have a great reason, but I gotta ask. Your children are being emotionally strangled, and yet you continue to live with this man. And it's not just the kids. You feel small, helpless, trapped, and weak. He drains life from your soul. And your children watch you be small. Now keep listening. And that makes your love no longer valuable to them. Really, they can't feel loved by you because they see you as a weak person. So if you're a weak person, what does your love mean to them? They like your attention. They probably eat your food, and they wouldn't do it consciously, but they would tend to discount anything you do or say because essentially you're a slave to your husband. And being a slave isn't high on their most valuable people list. There would have to be a powerful reason to let this continue. Is it money? If it's that, live somewhere that's much less expensive. Do whatever it takes to free your children from that exposure. Now, I'm not pushing you, but I'm telling you that it only gets worse with a narcissist. It's like living with poison. You continue. What should I say to my children about my husband's behaviors? I don't want my children to have the negative influence and learn the bad behaviors from the father, but they are. You continue. So I want to use what their father did as maybe a case study, but I also want to teach them to respect their father and to avoid any blaming, like he's the bad guy. So far, I only tell them, your father didn't get sufficient real love, because clearly you've been reading real love, and didn't get sufficient guidance, so he's been making mistakes. But he loves all of you, so you need to forgive him. You've seen that, we'll get to them. There's a contradiction in every other word you're saying. I'm going to continue with what mom is saying to the children. So you need to forgive him. Only your love can change him. Pray for him, and God will open his eyes and heart to learn. So pretty much every word of that was wrong. I'm not criticizing you. I'm trying to free you from this prison that you live in that was constructed by this narcissist and guaranteed constructed by the people who raised you, or you wouldn't have fallen for this story. You wouldn't have fallen for his lies from the very beginning. So let's go over this. What you're telling the kids. You said your father didn't get sufficient love or guidance. That was true. That's true. That's the one thing that is true of the things that you are planning on telling your kids. And then you said, so he has been making mistakes. Actually, he's way past mistakes. So he has learned that the only way to survive, and I'm actually recommending you say this to them. He's learned that the only way to survive, because of how horrible his own childhood was, he's learned that the only person who cares about him is himself. So the only way to survive is to care for himself only. Everybody in his life has disappointed him. So now he counts on who to satisfy his needs? Him. We're back to the word me again. And that selfishness completely consumes him. They already deep down know this, but if you don't tell them, they're going to think something's wrong with them, that they don't feel affection from this man who can't give it. Narcissists cannot give affection to other people. They can appear to. They can do nice things for people. In fact, they can be incredibly seductive. And I don't mean sexually seductive as in attracting people to them, but they do it only to get what they want. He doesn't have room in his life for anybody but himself, which is why he parks in the wrong parking spaces, in the handicap zone, doesn't pay his debts, parties with his friends while exposing you to infections carried by all of his friends while he drinks and parties with them. And you need to tell your kids all that. Sounds harsh, but otherwise they're left with the confusion of there must be something wrong with them. Then you said, suggesting that you're going to say this to your kids, but he loves all of you. Absolutely wrong. So you need to tell him he doesn't know how to love anybody. I'm not blaming him, not blaming you, not blaming anybody. But he was raised in such a way that he does not know how to love. He's completely consumed with taking care of him. His choice to be loving was stolen from him as a child. We talked about this last week, actually. No, it was last night on a different broadcast, my fault. We talk about the importance of choice in our lives, but some people have been treated so badly and wounded so much that they don't have any choices left except to protect themselves and get what they want. And your children need to know this, or the world is going to be horrifyingly confusing to them. Actually, it already is. You've taught them that they need to pray to God to protect their father and keep him away from temptation of cigarettes, alcohol, and bad friends, to use your words. Worse, you've told them that only their love can change him. That's awful. It is never the job of a child to protect their father or change him, ever. So you've given them an impossible burden, and it will crush them, which is why I told you early on that the two hardest groups of people I've ever seen in working with to help them to find happiness and get rid of the pain in their lives are narcissists, and I've never helped one. I had little bursts where I thought I was making it, but nope, never have. And the children and spouses of narcissists who can be helped, and it starts with the truth, which is what we're talking about right now. You said that you proposed saying to them, you need to forgive him. You can help them understand him, and that not being angry or resentful themselves will free them from the chains of resentment. But telling them to forgive him when they have just boiling resentment in them, and they do. I've never met a child of a resentment who doesn't have, or a child of a narcissist who isn't boiling with very often hidden resentment that they can't even put a voice to because it's all they've ever known. It's a horrible life to live with a narcissist because you feel like you're nothing and you've never seen anything different. You said to them, or planned to say to them, if you pray for him, God will open his eyes and his heart to learn. Maybe. But the greatest gift God gives mankind is the power to make their own choices. If prayer will simply open his eyes and heart, well, every narcissist on earth has been prayed over, and their eyes and heart didn't open. And if it did, then that would be taking from the narcissist their ability to choose. Worse, if his eyes and heart are not open, the kids will then feel responsible that they didn't pray hard enough or long enough. It's a really terrible burden to give some kids that they need to fix their dad. Mom continues, we discussed their father's mistakes, what they can learn from it. And yes, they do need to learn from his behavior, that he's being selfish, that feeling unloved and being unloving and irresponsible don't lead to happiness. They do need to be taught that. So you do need to use him as an example. And you say, I don't even know if my teaching is right. I hope I can learn. You don't mean to do this. It is not intentional. And I repeat that I'm not blaming. You're exposing your children to selfishness, anger, blaming, dishonesty, lack of responsibility, and a physical, potentially deadly virus because of his behavior. You need to ask yourself if you are willing to continue standing by while your children are wounded like this, potentially fatally, emotionally and physically. I'm just observing about how serious this situation is so that you don't just dismiss it. Really an important thing to consider. Pretty serious subject. We'll start with something lighter next time. We'll see you tomorrow.